Hey guys, Forza Horizon 5 has landed with a bang, quite literally if you played the opening sequence where you dropped out of a cargo plane, and it's been extremely well received by players and critics. One of the reasons Forza Horizon is hugely popular is due to the pure amount of activities you can partake in-game. These activities can range from different racing disciplines from street racing, drifting and rallying, but they also include being able to paint and tune your car. Many players jump into Forza game just for the livery editing, and many will spend a lot of hours in the garage tuning their cars. In this video, I'm going to focus on Forza Horizon 5 tuning. I'll run through all of the different aspects of tuning your car and how to achieve certain results. I'll also run through every tuning option to help provide a good understanding of how each setup option will affect your car's handling. My goal for this video is to help those who want to learn how to tune their cars in Forza by providing some insight into how the tuning works. And I'll also try and provide some insight for more experienced Forza tuners and those who are having some issues with certain aspects of your car setup. Towards the end of the video, I'll round out by giving you a few solutions to common problems. Maybe your car understeers too much, or maybe it loses too much grip over bumps. Well, we'll cover all of these problems and potential fixes later on in the video. Before we jump in, some people may ask, why tune your own car when you can just download a community setup? And yes, there are plenty of car setups available for you to download, and the process of downloading a tune is super easy. However, it may be hard to find a tune that works well for the result you're after. If you want to create a car setup that's perfectly adapted to your own driving style and achieves the result you're after, tuning yourself is the way to go. Say you want a car with great straight line speed, but it's gentle over the bumps, or a car that has a tendency to understeer but can maintain a high minimum speed. Finding a community setup with these exact requirements could be extremely hard. So before I go too deep into the tuning options, I want to give you an overview of how each area of the car affects your tune. This little bit of the video will serve as a brief introduction to each aspect of tuning. Then further on, I'll jump into each area in a little more detail. So starting with the tyres, your tyre pressures control how much pressure is in each tyre. This directly affects how inflated your tyres are, affecting your overall contact patch with the road and how soft your tyres are under stress. Your gearing setup will allow you to individually adjust your gear ratios. This serves as a great area to tune your car towards faster acceleration or better top speed, and these tuning options will directly affect how quickly you need to change through the gears when driving. Your alignment affects the angles that your wheels are aligned to. Camber affects the angle at which your wheels lean when looking from the front. This can affect how much of your tyre is in contact with the road as you lean on each tyre through a corner. Toe affects whether your tyres point in or out. This can adjust a lot of aspects of your car, from tyre temperatures to how responsive your car is. And your caster affects the angle of your suspension mounting, which in turn affects the camber of your wheels. Your anti-roll bars link both sides of your suspension. They can have a big effect on your overall handling and can affect how much oversteer you get mid-corner. Your springs and ride height will affect how stiff and rigid your car is over bumps, as well as how low your car sits to the ground. Just like anti-roll bars, this can have an effect on your oversteer-understeer balance. Then your damping setup is the third suspension tuning option and is heavily linked to your springs and ARBs. Your dampers affect how fast or slow your springs compress and extend. Your aero setup controls how much downforce your car generates. Here, you can tune your car for ultimate top speed or better cornering downforce. Your braking setup works in a very similar way to many other games. You have the setup option for brake balance and one for brake pressure. Here, you can optimize how much braking force gets sent to the front and rear wheels and how sensitive your brakes are. Your differential controls how much power gets sent to each individual wheel across an axle. For example, a rear wheel drive car with a rear diff will control how much power goes to each rear wheel of your car. This is great at controlling how much slip your car has under traction and how much oversteer or understeer your car has. So that's a brief overview of each area. But before I jump into the deep dives, let's first look at why some tuning options are locked by default. So when you first open your car setup in Forza Horizon 5, you'll more than likely see that a few setup options are greyed out with a lock icon next to them. This doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to tune that area of the car, but it does mean you can't tune it without a specific upgrade. For example, if you look at the aero setup options, with most stock road cars, you'll see both front and rear aero locked. This is because there isn't a tunable part installed in that area yet. Sticking with the aero example, to be able to tune your downforce and aerodynamics, your car will need an adjustable front splitter and an adjustable rear wing installed. You can install these parts over in the custom upgrade part of your garage. Simply head over to the upgrades, click on the Aero and Appearance tile, and you'll see that you can install an adjustable part. This is indicated by the note that says adjustable on each individual part. If the note says non-adjustable, then you simply won't be able to tune that part of your car if you install that particular part. As soon as you've installed the adjustable part, you can head back to the custom tuning section and you'll find the Aero is now adjustable. This method can be applied to various parts of your car's tuning, from the gearing to the brakes and more. Also, as a little side note, some parts that you can install will only partially unlock tuning options. For example, the gearing can only be fully tunable when you install a race transmission. If you only install the sport transmission, you'll only be able to partially tune your gearing. So now that I've run through what each setup option generally does at a base level, I'll start to look at each Forza Horizon 5 tuning option in much more detail. I'll show you exactly what every setup option does, and I'll give you some starting values so you can create a base tune. So let's kick things off with the first option, which is the tyres. Your tyre pressures directly affect how much air is in each of your tyres. As Horizon 5 isn't a full-on simulator, tyre wear isn't an issue here. We don't need to set up our car to counteract tyre wear, and we can focus entirely on grip and responsiveness. As a general rule of thumb, the more pressure in your tyres, the more responsive your car will feel. But this doesn't mean you should maximise your tyre pressures though, because high tyre pressures can break traction much easier. If your tyres are overinflated, you'll have less surface area in contact with the road, meaning it's easier to lose traction altogether. With lower tyre pressures, you have more of a contact patch with the road, which does a few things to your setup. It will first make it harder to break traction as you have a larger contact patch, and it will also increase your overall tyre temperatures. Finally, lower pressures reduce responsiveness, making your car feel a little more sluggish in general. This is because as you turn your steering wheel, there is more of the tyre touching the road, making it harder for you to turn your wheels. It is generally preferable to have slightly more tyre pressure at the front to make your front wheels a little more responsive. You can aim to have your pressures around the 30 to 34 mark to start with, and then hone them a little bit more when you're testing it on track. Moving on to the gearing, your gearing tuning will allow you to adjust how fast your car goes through the gears as you accelerate. If you increase your gearing, you're doing two things. First, your car will travel through the rev range slightly slower, and this will affect your outright acceleration. However, as your rev range is increased, your car has a higher potential top speed. Tuning your gearing really is a trade-off between top speed and acceleration. If you've added power to your car via custom upgrades, you'll probably need to adjust your gearing to suit this. Your stock gearing will be too short, meaning your car will rev too fast and you won't reach its true top speed potential. When it comes to actually adjusting your gear ratio, you can approach it in two ways. Your final gear will affect your whole gearing. You increase your final gear and all of your gearing becomes longer. You reduce it and all gears become shorter. A very visual way to show your gear setup is via the graph in the bottom right corner of the tuning screen. Each individual white line represents a single gear, and the length of the graph is your overall speed. The goal is to tune your gearing so your final gear is close to the maximum potential top speed, indicated by the bottom right number of the graph. If you move your final gear to the left towards speed, you'll lengthen your gears. This is normally the first place to start, so your gearing closer matches your top speed potential. I'd also move your first and second gear individually a touch closer to the left, lengthening the gears. This will make your car rev through the first and second gear slightly slower, which will help increase your traction. Your car won't be as wild when accelerating from slow speed, and this technique is especially helpful in higher power cars. I'm going to kick off our alignment tuning with camber. As mentioned in my brief overview, the camber affects the angle of your wheels looking from the front. More negative camber will point the tops of your wheels closer to the car, while any positive camber will point them away from the car. It's absolutely the norm to set up your car with negative camber. This angles your wheels so that when you turn through a corner, your car leans on the tyre. This in turn pushes more surface area into contact with the road surface, increasing your mid-corner grip. The more negative camber you tune into the car, the smaller your contact patch will be when travelling in a straight line though. This will affect braking performance, and this will prevent us from running camber that is too high. Start your setup with around -1.5 to -1.8 of negative camber at the front and slightly less at the rear. This will give us a good base to work from. Your toe works in a similar method to camber, but affects the angles of the wheels when looking at them from the top. Toe in means that the front of your tyres will be pointing in towards the car, and toe out points them away from the car. Toe out is generally preferable for the front tyres, but only a little bit. Toe out will give you slightly more responsiveness, but it can make your car feel twitchy if you apply too much. I normally go for just 1 or 2 degrees of toe out at the front, and 0 or 1 of toe in at the rear. Toe in at the rear will promote understeer, which can help stabilise your car a little, especially if your car is rear wheel drive. The caster affects the angle which your suspension arm sits when looking from the side. A caster angle of 0 means your suspension sits directly vertical, while any degrees of positive caster will angle the top of the suspension arm towards the rear of your car. You'll generally find setups with positive caster angles. The results of this are higher amounts of camber when cornering, while keeping the camber more neutral when travelling in a straight line. With higher caster settings, you can run slightly lower camber angles, which will help with braking in a straight line. Because of this, you can run your caster a little higher than default while lowering the camber angle a touch. Go for a starting angle of around 6 to 7 degrees. Moving on to your anti-roll bars or your ARBs. Your ARBs tie both of your wheels together across the left and right sides of the car. Front ARBs link both front and left and front right, while rear ARBs do the same across the rear axle. Stiffer anti-roll bars will allow less body roll through a corner, while softer ARBs will let your car roll more, making it feel softer and washier as you turn. By softening the front ARBs, you'll start to introduce a tendency to oversteer. Softening the rear ARBs will give your car a tendency to understeer. It is recommended that you soften your front ARBs to start and stiffen your rear ARBs a touch. This will give us a good platform for a base setup, which we can adjust later. Do note that the anti-roll bars play a big role in fine-tuning your car to understeer or oversteer, so we'll definitely look to adjust these more when we get out onto track. Your springs tuning option will affect how stiff your car feels over bumps and through corners. It plays a large role in how much understeer and oversteer your car has, so should be adjusted along with your anti-roll bars and your damping. Forza Horizon 5's base tunes have a tendency to understeer too much, so I always like to soften up the front of the car a little for my first tuning pass. I presume the developers set up the base tunes in this way to make each car a little more controllable for a wider range of racers. As a good rule of thumb, a softer front spring will increase your oversteer, while a softer rear spring will increase understeer. If you set up your overall spring tune to be too soft, however, your car will feel slower and less responsive. If you tune your car to be too stiff, it will have a tendency to snap out of control over harsher bumps, and can be slightly harder to drive. As I mentioned, lowering the front spring stiffness is my recommendation here, at least to start with. Your ride height controls how low your car is to the ground. This should be adjusted in line with your spring stiffness, as a car that is lower will require slightly stiffer springs to stop the car from bouncing into the ground over the bumps. The goal with ride height is to lower your car as far as you can get away with before you start touching the road surface. Lower ride heights improve your overall handling by reducing your centre of gravity. You'll also encounter less drag, which means your car will be a touch faster in a straight line too. If you lower your car too much though, it will start touching the ground and bottoming out. This is something we definitely want to avoid. If you bottom out, you'll feel a sudden loss of control and your car could spin out. The base ride height tune in Forza Horizon 5 is almost always too conservative and can be lowered a touch. Next, let's have a look at your damping tune. Your damping affects how your suspension behaves over bumps and works directly in tandem with your spring setup. Your rebound stiffness affects how fast or slow your suspension recovers from being compressed. It directly affects how your spring extends after compression. Much like our spring stiffness, if you tune your dampers in Horizon 5 to be too stiff, your car can feel skittish over bumps. This is normally one area that the developers have got pretty right, so I quite often leave the default tune alone to start with. The bump stiffness is much like the rebound stiffness, but in reverse. Bump stiffness will affect how fast your springs compress. You can calculate your bump stiffness based on how you have tuned your rebounds. Throughout motorsports, the rough calculation is that your bump stiffness should be around 60 to 70% of your rebound stiffness. This is about where the default tune already is, and much like the rebound stiffness above, I don't normally touch this for my first tuning pass. As we move on to track testing, you can tune in some oversteer or understeer characteristics by playing with your damper tune. Next up, we'll have a look at your aero. Your aerodynamic setup directly affects the amount of downforce generated. Higher aero will produce more downforce at the front or rear of your car. If you're tuning your car for a shorter track where top speed isn't as important, or you require more cornering ability, you can tune your aero towards cornering. This will, however, have the negative effect of making your car slower in a straight line, as you're effectively creating extra drag. Increasing front aero is a good technique if your car is understeering too much. Your car will become more responsive at the front with more front aero applied. This will, however, increase the tendency to oversteer, as the rear of the car will feel lighter due to the front having more of the aero balance. Adding rear aero does the inverse of the front aero. More rear aero will improve rear stability, allowing your car to feel more planted, but too much will increase understeer, as the front of your car won't have as much of the downforce. I would normally look to increase my aero at both the front and rear of the car, but as this tuning option will have a huge impact on your car's behaviour and speed, you can adjust it to fit the style of car you're building. Your brake tune will help you feel more confident under braking. It's a simple yet effective part of your setup that you should always consider. The brake balance affects how much of the braking force is distributed to the front or rear of your car. More frontward braking will improve overall braking stability while making your car more prone to understeering. By moving your brake balance rearward, you'll create a car with a tendency to be more twitchy at the rear. In motorsport and other sim racing games, you'll normally find a more frontward brake bias, generally between 52 and 57%. In Horizon 5, I'd recommend adjusting this slightly towards the front. Your brake pressure will affect the amount of brake force that is applied when you apply 100% brakes. Higher brake pressure will increase your overall braking force, but will also increase the possibility of locking your wheels. I'd recommend leaving this at 100% to start with, as the higher you go, the harder it will become to manage your brakes at full force without either locking a wheel or using ABS assist. The final tuning option is the differential, and this can be one of the more confusing areas of your overall tune. This controls the amount of power that is sent to either the left or right wheel along a specific axle. You'll find that front wheel drive cars have a front diff, while rear wheel drive cars have a rear diff, and all wheel drive cars will have both a front, rear and centre diff. If you lower your diff tune or open your diff, then your car will send the most amount of power to the wheel which is easiest to turn. The more you close or lock your diff, the more evenly power will get distributed along each axle. It definitely isn't recommended to lock the diff entirely if you're street or track racing, as this will cause both tyres to rotate at the exact same speed. And if both tyres rotate at the same speed, your inside wheel will lose traction. This is because your outside tyre needs to spin faster as it's travelling a longer distance when you turn a corner. If both tyres are spinning at the same rate, your inside tyre will break traction as it's spinning faster than it needs to. The difference between acceleration and deceleration is how your diff behaves under acceleration and braking. These settings can also be called on throttle and off throttle, just like in the F1 game series. Adjusting your acceleration tune will directly affect traction, or how easy it is for your car to break traction when you accelerate. A higher acceleration setup will increase oversteer, and lowering this will potentially increase understeer. For track racing, you won't want to go much higher than about 70 to 80%, as your car will start to oversteer more and more. Higher powered cars can handle a higher acceleration setup than lower powered cars. The opposite of the above is true for front wheel drive cars. The lower your diff setting, the more oversteer you'll have, and the higher your setup, the more understeer you'll get. Typically, you'll want a value around 15 to 30% here. For the deceleration diff setup, this will affect rotation on corner entry, and generally, lower is better. If you've seen any of my F1 2021 car setups, you'll know that I always run an extremely low off throttle or deceleration diff setup. This will promote better corner entry while minimising understeer. If you do go too low with your off throttle diff though, you can promote lift-off oversteer, making your car behave wildly on corner entry. If you need stability under braking, a slightly higher deceleration setup can help out. But generally, always try to keep your deceleration diff tuned low, and it can be set anywhere from 0% to 25%. Your centre diff will act as an overall controller for how much power gets sent to the front or rear of your car. Typically, you will want a more rearward focused setup here to promote more oversteer, especially in rally cars where you need to be able to swing the rear of the car around. Go for a tune around 60 to 80% here. If you do need a bit more understeer, you can bring this back closer to the 50% mark. So with the technical part of this video complete, it's now time to hit the track for the first time. This is where you will start to get a feel for how your car behaves and gives us a chance to make any corrections that may be necessary. I'd recommend finding a part of the Horizon 5 map that suits your car's driving style to test on. For example, if you're creating a track car, head over to one of the asphalt racetracks in the game. There is no point testing your car in an area that you won't be driving it in. While testing your car, I'd recommend using the telemetry window to show you exactly what's happening at all times. This is accessed in-game by switching ANA for telemetry in the settings and hitting the down button on your D-pad. You can then scroll through different telemetry windows using the left and right D-pad buttons. A few areas to keep an eye on while testing are your tyres and suspension compression. First up, we'll test for tyre temperatures and pressures. Open up your heat telemetry window and start to drive around a bit. You'll notice that each tyre changes from blue through to yellow and red. If your readout is going into red regularly under normal conditions, then your tyres are running too hot. Your goal should be to set your tyre pressures so that under cornering, your tyre readout doesn't go any darker than yellow. This is where your peak grip levels will be. On the flip side, if your tyres aren't reaching the yellow zone under cornering, then there is a good chance your tyres aren't getting enough heat into them. Next up, we'll test for camber. So when testing your camber, you should open up your tyre window. Here you'll see 4 different camber readouts that you should keep an eye on. When your car isn't moving, the camber values should be close to what you set them as in the tune. As you start to drive and go around corners, you'll see these fluctuate up and down. The key here is to keep an eye on the outside wheel's camber as you corner. You need to ensure while cornering, this value doesn't go into positive numbers. In fact, it shouldn't really dip below minus 0.5 degrees. If it does go lower than this, or even into the positive readout, you should look to add more negative camber. So run a few corners while keeping an eye on the tyres while cornering and ensure your camber value is around minus 1 degrees and minus 0.5 degrees at its peak. If it's much lower than this, you may have too much camber installed into your setup. Moving on to the suspension testing, you'll want to ensure your suspension isn't bottoming out. And you can test this by ensuring the pink bar doesn't hit the top or bottom of the white bar it sits in. If it does, then you'll need to jump back into the setup and tweak a few things. So now we're getting to the part of the video where we can look for any potential issues in our setup and how we best fix them. By now, we should have a reasonable base tune for your car in Forza Horizon 5. We should have checked that the camber, tyre temperatures and suspension are all working as they should be. However, if you are experiencing any issues with any of these areas or other areas in your setup, then some adjustments should be made. This part of the video will run you through any common problems and how to apply setup tweaks to fix them. With a car setup, the most common issues come in the form of excess understeer or oversteer, so I'd look to address those first. If you have too much understeer on corner entry, so that's when you're arriving at the corner and starting to turn in, you can look to increase your front aero a little, increase your toe out at the front of the car, lower your rear deceleration differential, increase front tyre pressures, lower your springs, rebound stiffness and ARBs, or increase rear spring stiffness. Now I wouldn't recommend doing all of these at once, but pick a few and start to adjust them, get back out on track and see how your car behaves. If it's any better, then great. If it's not, jump back and readjust something else. You'll know you've got too much understeer on corner exit if your car starts to drift out towards the edge of the track and you can't bring it in line. If this is the case, try increasing your rear acceleration diff, adjust your centre diff slightly more rearwards, and stiffen your ARBs. If you have too much oversteer on corner entry, often referred to as lift-off oversteer, you can try a few things. Try increasing your deceleration differential, increasing your front toe in, increasing your front springs, rebound stiffness and ARBs, and increase rear aero or lower your front aero slightly. A combination of these settings should make your car a little bit more stable on corner entry. If you have too much oversteer on corner exit, which is one of the most common issues with a car setup, you could lower your rear acceleration differential, you can adjust your centre diff more frontwards, and try softening your ARBs a little. You can also look to add a little bit more rear aero to your setup. If you find your tyres are not heating up, you can do a couple of things. Maybe try increasing your toe out a little bit to create a little bit more friction and drag, or also look to lower your tyre pressures a little bit. If your car's too twitchy riding over bumps, then lower your spring stiffness and lower your rebound stiffness a little. If you will find that your car is spinning when changing direction, increase your front ARB stiffness, increase rear aero a little, and also look to increase your rear deceleration differential. If you're not getting enough braking performance, try to reduce your front camber, therefore increasing your contact patch through the road. You can offset this a little by increasing your caster. You can also add more front aero and stiffer front suspension as well. If your car's too slow in a straight line, adjust your final gear more towards the speed side. You can lower your aero a little bit and lower your toe as well to reduce that excess drag. If you get too much wheel spin at lower speeds and you're finding it hard to keep traction, increase your first and second gear ratios more towards speed. Also, look to lower your rear tyre pressures and lower your rear camber. So with all that in mind, now is the time to get out on track, try out the recommendations I've laid out in this video, and if you are having issues, keep referring back to my hit list which I just went through on potential solutions. But overall, hopefully this in-depth Horizon 5 tuning guide has helped run you through each tuning department and how each setup option can affect your car. If this video has helped you out, why not save this video so you can keep referring back to it. And also, give this video a big like and let me know in the comment section below how you're getting on with Forza Horizon 5 and how you're finding the tuning. Also, if you want more Horizon 5 videos, let me know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for more racing content. But for now guys, see you on track.